With the power and endurance of Toyota trucks, you can go to the most incredible places, like this valley, where the echo does different voices.
Hello! Hello! Hello!
We know what we're made of. Toyota trucks. Is trade with China an economic opportunity or a national defense and security threat? Perhaps it's both. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. Ever since Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to China in mid-January and the announcement of a new strategic partnership, the praising of a new world order, in one of which apparently China would be at the center, there's been a lot of debate about what Mark Carney has tied us into. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? There are an awful lot of problems with what has been described as the new strategic partnership with China. The joint announcement put out by President Xi and Prime Minister Carney talks about much more than just trading with China. This is a deeper agreement, and that is what has people concerned. Not only people here in Canada, but of course, the guy south of the border, Donald Trump.
If they do a deal with China, yeah, they'll do something very substantial. Because we can look and have a great relationship with China, President Xi, but we don't want China to take over Canada. And if they make the deal that he's looking to make, China will take over Canada. And the first thing they're going to do, end ice hockey.
Mark Carney, meanwhile, will tell you that no, it's not going to be a free trade agreement or anything such.
We have commitments under CUSMA that not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification. We have no intention of doing that with China or any other non-market economy. What we've done with China is to rectify some issues that developed in the last couple of years. In many respects, we're going, to use the expression, back to the future with respect to EVs, with respect to agriculture, with respect to fish products and other food products, but with additional protections.
And yet, well, he did portray it as something much more than just a simple trade agreement back when he announced it.
And to that end, President Xi and I are announcing that Canada and China are forging a new strategic partnership. It will focus on 5 key areas where both our nations stand to make substantial and sustained gains.
So what is the truth and what do we need to be concerned about? To help us understand that, I'm turning to Sandra Watson Parcels. She is a Canadian who lived in China for many years and is currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Defense Studies at King's College London. She is an expert in analyzing China's economic and strategic goals. Here is our conversation. So, Sandra, you said a little while ago that Carney's proposed strategic partnership with China represents a fundamental misreading of the current security environment. This isn't about trade protectionism. It's about recognizing asymmetric competition that's been underway for decades. What do you mean by that? And what do you and I and the other people that are skeptical of his deal with China not understand?
Right. So when I heard Carney speaking in Davos and shortly before that in China, he used the word strategic partnership. Now, strategic partnership is used in diplomacy, but in the general purpose of strategic partnership, it goes beyond just trade. Strategic partnership is about having a deeper relationship with states that have like-minded values. So, for example, democracy, human rights, deeper defense strategy. And that's something we're just never going to have with China. So when he says strategic partnership, from a defense and security perspective, it's not really what it is. It is a trade discussion. It is limited interaction on specific trade concerns. We should do business with China, but the general definition of strategic partnership is much deeper, and that's not something as as a Western country that we can do with China. So that stood out to me.
Well, and that's the part that I've been trying to help people understand, because the reply I will get is, but Donald Trump's going to China. They're trading with China. everyone's trading with China. We should trade with China. And I keep saying trade is not the issue. It's everything else around it. And when I looked at the joint announcement between Prime Minister Carney and President Xi Jinping, there were things in there that made me pause, including, I know we've been doing it for a while now, but the currency swap. So Canadian and Chinese businesses can settle to a limited degree trade in local currency, in yuan or Canadian dollars. They don't have to use the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. Sure, we started this a long time ago, about a decade or so ago, and it is limited. But one of the things the Americans are really concerned about now is keeping the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. They're 76% of our trade. Continuing that and saying we'll go deeper is going to be problematic come CUSMA negotiations.
Right. And I think a lot of this has to do with terminology, with misusing terms in international relations such as trade, free trade, strategic partnership. What do these mean? Which when our government speaks, is it reality or is it rhetoric? Is it poking the bear down south or is it really strategic partnership? Because if it is, that's a big concern for security. So I would hope that from a security perspective, our government could make it clear that when we say strategic partnership, we're not saying, go, are we saying it? Because I can't see it actually happening. But we're not saying, defense agreements. We're not saying agreements on human rights. I mean, how can we? China has, camps with minority Uyghurs, in it. So a lot of oppression in China of political prisoners. We've had the two Michaels situation. So there's a lot of strategic partnership that we can never, have with China. So when our government says strategic partnership, they're really saying, I'm thinking they're saying trade negotiations. So then why not just say that? Right. So that's where, for a lot of Canadians, what is happening, and let's cut through the noise and what is actually happening. What is the reality and what is the rhetoric?
You pointed out online that the Biden administration had great issues with China, and this is something I've been trying to make people understand. I mean, that maybe they weren't paying attention over the last decade because the entire view in Washington toward China, much like it has in Canada, but not to the same extent, has shifted. When I started going down to DC covering politics, it was about bipartisan consensus in favor of deeper ties with China. Now it's the exact opposite. And so you were writing and you pointed out that the Biden administration had made several moves to distance themselves from China, to see China as more of an adversary. They, in fact, are the ones that brought about the EV 100% tariffs that we then matched. Trump's rhetoric is just different. Now, I want to read a paragraph of what you wrote. You said, Trump's more confrontational approach, whatever its flaws, reflects the urgency of this moment. This window for preserving Western strategic advantage is narrowing. U.S. hegemonic stability, for all its imperfections, underwrites Canadian security and prosperity. First off, proof that you're an academic like Mark Carney, you're using hegemony or variants thereof. Most of the rest of us don't do that. But let's talk about this. The whole issue is about much more than trade. It's about the strategic or the security and prosperity of the two countries. China is using, for whatever people may think of how Donald Trump is doing things, and I've been vocal, I don't agree with his tariffs, his trade war on Canada, but the China uses economics as a weapon far more than the Americans do, regardless of who's president. Witness the canola tariffs, not just now, but when the two Michaels were in jail, when in 2017, in 2013, 14, I was talking to grain farmers the other day and canola farmers the other day who told me, oh yeah, and back in '06 and '08 and on it goes. China uses trade as a weapon to try and bring you into their sphere.
They do. one thing in my research that I noticed almost a decade ago, and I don't think anybody was, well, not anybody, but a lot of people weren't paying attention. Like you said, there was just a consensus, let's do business with China, and not looking at the risks, and not looking deeper into what China was doing. So China, I mean, before Xi, but it's ramped up since Xi, has used soft power to erode our world order. And we really didn't do much to counter it for quite a long time. And when I talk about the Biden administration, I think there was an awakening from, the United States, the West, Canada, that, hey, this is a problem and we need to counter it. So we saw, the word decoupling from doing trade with goods that were, dual threat or dual purpose or
So something that could be both civilian and military.
and used for military, yeah, or left us vulnerable. For example, within pharmaceuticals, right? Let's say China makes a move we disagree with, but we are depending on our medicines to come from China. So then we leave ourselves vulnerable to manipulation for them saying you can't get involved in this geopolitical situation, or we're going to hold back. So
Well,
so the,
I mean, we
the
saw that during the pandemic, Sandra, where you know uh, PPE supplies were being held back, and what did we all pledge to do? Let's reshore. Mm, okay, we have in some areas and to some degree, but we're still reliant on China.
right. So the idea was let's decouple. If we want to buy some things from China, great. But on the things where we become vulnerable, where it's a risk to our national security for ourselves and for our allies, we need to diversify. I think that's healthy. I think do business with China, do trade, but we need to protect ourselves when it comes to our national security. So we started doing that. So matching soft power with power, decoupling. The problem is China's been doing this for decades. And now we're going to start countering in 4 or 5 years. It's just not, the reaction is not fast enough and effective enough. So Trump comes in, and this is where I argue that strategically, the Biden administration and the Trump administration before that, they are the same. They recognize China as an adversary. They recognize the rise of China and the vulnerabilities. They didn't do anything about it. Then they began to introduce in soft power. Then Trump comes in and goes, this isn't fast enough. This isn't working. China is growing exponentially. We did nothing for a long time, and ramps it up. And like you said, we can argue about his style and his tactics, but that is the sort of the macro perspective of the geopolitical and national security concerns we have, and, as a Western country. So this is where I come back to Biden. So if we're having a trade disagreements with the United States, it needs to be outside of our security concerns. We are on the same side with the United States and our Western allies when it comes to having to manage China's as an adversary. Same with Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And we can't play with that.
Now, Donald Trump brought in tariffs on Chinese products like Chinese steel. The Biden administration not only kept them in place, they increased them in 2024. They saw that this needed to happen. I remember covering it at the time, and it's quite frustrating for me that, and well, anytime politicians lie and it becomes part of the official narrative because they're not called on the lie, whether it was Doug Ford or Justin Trudeau, what made the U.S. take their tariffs off of our steel? Well, we put tariffs on their bourbon and their playing cards. No, we came to an agreement to stop letting China dump their steel into Canada, polish it once, put a Made in Canada logo on it, and ship it south. Um, that's what we were doing. And they warned us for about a year, stop letting Chinese steel into Canada this way. You're allowing Chinese steel to be transshipped. And we just refused to do anything. In fact, it was the night before the Americans were imposing the tariffs when then Finance Minister Bill Morneau finally said, okay, we're going to do something. But they didn't do it. They just promised they'd do it. Then we got the tariffs. Then it was almost a year of fighting it and claiming that playing cards and bourbon did it, when both governments actually put out a joint statement saying that it was the dealing with Chinese dumping. Now they want to do it with other products, and we seem to be willing to let them. Are we just so addicted to trade with China that we'll ignore the fact that it will harm our biggest trading partner? Or is this, I know you're more from a defense point of view, but is it just domestic policy? Like, this is all mind-boggling to me.
We have a plan to diversify from China by working with our allies, including the United States. You just said that. We work with South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, the Philippines. I'm happy to see that, the submarines with South Korean submarines. I'm happy to see that we have, the Charlottetown left today to go to the Indo-Pacific to exercise a right of free, going along the Taiwan Strait, because Taiwan is an independent country. So we as allies, we have a better impact, a much more effective impact against China when we work together. So right now, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot by fighting with the United States to the point where it's affecting our national security, and then talking about things like, strategic partnerships with China.
How far can we and should we go then? Is the reserve currency issue that I talked about earlier, local currency swaps, is that an issue we should perhaps pull back from? Should we cut ties where, you get the People's Liberation Army being involved, such as the Winnipeg Biohazard Lab? We seem to be blind to that for a long time. How far? Because these announcements all talk about different people-to-people ties. They talk about cultural ties. They go beyond trade, which is what China wants. They want a deepening. How far do we go? What kind of trade should we have with China?
From a security perspective, trade with China, but if it makes us vulnerable in any way, don't do it. We have our allies. We have our other Indo-Pacific partners that we can do business with. We don't need to do business with China if it makes us vulnerable. And it's as simple as that. We don't need to be doing currency exchanges. We don't need to be working in labs with China. We can do that with the United States. We can do that with Japan. We can do that with our European partners. But if it leaves us vulnerable, why would we do it?
So buy things like the cup that I'm drinking out of my water right now, or the plastic
Mine might be
mixing bowl
too.
in my kitchen. But avoid deepening ties in the way that China wants. Sandra, when we come back, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, I do want to dive into the EV issue, and are they actually spy cars? More in moments.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
I didn't think the pain from the shingles rash would affect simple, everyday tasks like bathing, getting dressed, or even walking around. I was wrong. Though not everyone at risk will develop it, 99% of people over the age of 50 already have the virus that causes shingles, and it could reactivate at any time. I developed it, and the blistering rash lasted for weeks. Don't learn the hard way, like I did. Talk to your doctor or pharmacist today. Sponsored by GSK.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?
where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
First of all, anyone who buys these cars, they won't be allowed to go to the U.S. Cybersecurity. I call it the spy car that they're bringing in, and they won't be allowed to get over there. I don't trust what the Chinese put in these cars.
Every time that Doug Ford says that Chinese EVs are spy cars, he actually gets laughed at. I'm not joking about that, Sandra. I've watched some of my colleagues in the media laugh and ridicule this idea that these Chinese EVs are spy cars, but long before we put 100% tariffs on them, I had been hearing about this, the concerns raised around the security aspect of these cars. Since then, we've had the British military, British defense contractors ban their employees from using them, or if they use them, they can't bring them to work. They're told not to hook up their phones to them through Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. The Israeli military had leases for their officers with Chinese electric SUVs that they have since nullified, moving away from them. What is the reality in your view from a security and defense perspective on Chinese electric vehicles? And is it just the Chinese electric vehicles, or is it all of them?
So it's a concern. It's a concern, and it's real. And the reason it's real is because these cars contain technology that can be used to spy on us. I mean, they're essentially computers on wheels. They've got here, written it down here. They got cameras, microphones, sensors, GPS. So they can map sensitive sites, record audio, track patterns. Also, Chinese state security requires that all of their companies and them cooperate with them when it comes to national security. So any vehicle, now before the tariffs were put on, we did bring in tens of thousands of these EVs. They were from mostly Tesla, from the Shanghai plant, Volvo, and Polestar. Now, the problem isn't that they're not Chinese brands. The problem is that they were made in China and they have Chinese hardware and software. And I know you mentioned Israel, and data from the cars was tracked going to Chinese servers without permission.
Can you imagine that? China being able to track the whereabouts of an Israeli military official or a Canadian military official and know where they are, know what their patterns are, what their commute to and from work is? That becomes a huge national security threat, doesn't it?
It is. So you mentioned like the UK put in restrictions. I know Poland did, Israel did. United States went further, and they have stopped Chinese and Russian hardware and software from being in the vehicles, any of them, in order to prevent those vulnerabilities. So
if
see
they have Russian or Chinese software, you can't import them into the U.S. or you can't use them near defense installations?
Well, that's a good question. I'd have to double check.
Okay.
I think they were banned, but I'd have to double check that.
I mean, looking at what the Brits did, if you have one of these already, you're required to park 2 miles away from your office, which essentially says, don't bring the car to work ever.
Yeah. So let's make them go to, the data be sent to Canadian servers. Let's restrict military and government individuals who park their vehicles at military bases and government facilities. We have to put those restrictions in. From what I've heard, we've done nothing. Why? I'm not sure.
Okay, so let me ask you about that. You talked about servers. If you can explain that in simple terms, because I've heard it described as the stack has to be domestically located, things like that. That's not terms that most of us deal in. What needs to happen? We have to make sure that they're not transmitting or can't transmit back to China, or that things are stored here, because they're always updating. I mean, I've got friends with Teslas, and they love the fact that they get an alert on their phone. They say yes, and the software on their vehicle is updated. Um, we need to make sure that that's happening with Canadian or American servers. Is that what you're saying?
Right. So the data that it's collecting doesn't go straight back to China. That it has to go to a Canadian server where there's what it does there and how they restrict it. I don't know the details, but I know it does prevent the vehicles from taking that data and the collected data from where they've been, recording all of it and sending it directly back to the Chinese government. So we need those checks and balances in place to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I thought we would have learned all of this after a little company called Nortel that went under. Nortel was a Canadian giant, and I'm not saying that China helped bring it down, but they kind of stole all the technology, sent it back to China, and then undermined Nortel. It's not the only reason, but it's a major one. And I've spoken to people who know about, so Nortel's former Ottawa headquarters out in Canada, company just went away. The government bought the building. They said this would be a great spot for national defense headquarters. They had to tear it down to stud, and it was filled with bugs and cameras and listening devices all over the place. And we didn't learn then. And then we didn't learn when Huawei was trying to come in, and Huawei equipment, the claim was having backdoors that allowed data in Canada to be shuffled back to China, regardless of what they said. And now we're having the same debate on Chinese EVs. Even if they, we're sending data to Canadian servers, can we trust them not to have the Huawei type backdoors?
Right. Right. Yeah, these are really good questions, and I don't see any of them being addressed. What I find fascinating is, I look up uh, CSE and CSIS reports. They're doing their job. They're telling us that our greatest adversary and vulnerabilities come from China. I mean, if you look at the CSE assessment for 2025-26, I have a quote here from them. The People's Republic of China's expansive and aggressive cyber program presents the most sophisticated and active state cyber threat to Canada today. Now, that's from their assessment, that's CSE's assessment for 25-26. That's clear. CSIS is also giving us warnings. We've had the report on interference. So I think our security establishments are doing a good job of seeing the threat and showing it to us and advising the government. Where I'm not seeing it is translated into policy.
The issue of China in the Arctic is a similar one. This is something that I think the first time the Toronto Sun put it on the front page was during President Hu's 2010 visit. And that's because one of my colleagues, David Aiken, someone sent him or he came across a report in Chinese English language media, a government-controlled media outlet, and a senior general ahead of Hu's visit had given an interview where he talked about China being a near Arctic nation. And since they were 20% of the population, they were entitled to 20% of the resources in the Arctic. And of course, well, we consider the Arctic on this side ours, and Russia considers parts of it theirs, Norway, Denmark, et cetera, et cetera. And that was 2010. That's 15 years ago. And that interview by the general was not an accident. Those things don't happen in government-run Chinese media. That was put there to send a message that I don't think we properly received. And now we still have people ridiculing the idea that China wants anything to do with the Arctic or is poking around up there. I think, Prime Minister Carney, I'll give him credit. He has acknowledged it. But they are floating around Alaska, Nunavut, into Hudson's Bay, and around Greenland. All of that is happening, correct?
Correct. I don't understand the disconnect from the threats that we see in the Arctic and the ones we talked about, and the government just not taking it seriously in activating policy that would help protect our national defense. Why isn't there an Arctic base? Why isn't there more personnel there?
More
Why? I mean,
technology.
or yeah, exactly. And I blame both governments. I mean, not both parties, all governments from World War II on. We have neglected our armed forces, equipment. We have not kept up our armed forces in a way that we can defend our own land. And then we have rising powers like China. We're not prepared. So Ukraine should have been a wake-up call. Now there's continental war and kinetic warfare in continental Europe. And we are we are increasing our spending, but we should have been doing it all along, So I don't see, I think for some reason there's a disconnect in when the armed forces or security services advise government, I think they think they're being alarmist and they don't take it seriously. And that's concerning.
Well, Michelle Juno Katsuya, former CSIS agent, might tell you that they've been ignoring this since the Sidewinder report came out in, I think, 1997. We've talked to Michelle about that in the past in terms of political interference and elite capture and the like. Perhaps that's part of the reason why they haven't been acting. But let me ask you this. As we do look to rebuild the armed forces, as we do look to build infrastructure in the Arctic, something like Grays Bay, the port in Nunavut, or Premier Wab Kinew in Manitoba talking about Churchill being there. Should we look at having dual use infrastructure so that if we are putting in a deep water port in Churchill or Grays Bay, I'd say we should do both of them and perhaps more. Should they be not only commercial ports for exporting, should they be have a military use as well for our submarines and such?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to stop thinking that national security and trade and economics are two separate silos. They're not. They're very intermingled. And right now we have to be more proactive at defending the Arctic. And we also have to be more proactive at diversifying trade, expanding trade. So when we do something like create a port, yes, we not only want to do trade, but we want to defend trade, right? We have to defend our ability to trade. So these things are together. They're interconnected. They should not be looked at separately.
I might argue that, to a degree, the Americans have been doing that, with protecting shipping lanes and freedom of the seas for decades. But that the pivot that Donald Trump has made recently, as much as we don't like the aspects that hurt us, in his stance toward China and trade and geopolitics, is that he is doing what China has been doing for a while. He said, okay, that's working for them. They're coming at us with this. Let's respond that way. Whether it's, the right tactic or not, that's open for debate. But I would argue he's doing what China has been doing for a long time.
Yes. I would say that we have to do both that China has. But I think that every state should be looking after economics and protecting it with national defense. National defense is fed by your economics and your trade can expand if you have security. So I think it's just a healthy policy.
Sandra, thanks very much for your time today. Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please remember to hit subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave a comment, share this on social media, and let your friends know about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I Promised You. Castro would end up occupying a space in the Trudeau family similar to that of a beloved uncle. They went diving. They smoked cigars together. They gathered sea urchins for beach cookouts.
Informal talks at an island hideaway intensified their respect for each other, and their mutual enjoyment of skin diving added to the rapport.
In addition to a well-publicized 1976 summit meeting, Trudeau took 3 separate vacations to visit Castro after his time in politics had ended.
I can make, just one reference to Pierre Trudeau's sons to show the closeness of the relationship. The nickname that the Trudeau sons had for Fidel Castro was Papa Fidel. So that gives you an indication of the closeness of the bond that existed between a communist dictator, thorn in the side of every American administration for the past 50 years, and Pierre Trudeau.
When Trudeau's youngest son, Michel, died in an avalanche in 1998, Castro called the family in tears to express his condolences. As an 8-year-old, Michel had referred to Fidel Castro as his best friend. When Pierre died, Fidel declared 3 days of mourning in Cuba and flew to Montreal to act as an honorary pallbearer.
Every time Trudeau went down to Cuba, all the people in South Florida, the exiles, were thinking, why is this Western leader giving comfort to a murderous dictator, who is oppressing their people in Cuba, and saying, good things about Fidel Castro? And as I've mentioned, to have him in the pew at Trudeau's funeral, in the front row, as a dignified person, when he had been such a brutal leader, says more about Pierre Trudeau than it does about Fidel Castro.
Here's where we should probably touch on what Castro had done and what he was continuing to do while going on beach vacations with the Trudeau family. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What everywhere you get your podcasts.